Hello, and thank you for listening to the Fishing with Dom podcast. It is your friend Dominic, and I am here to share with you today my favorite ice fishing lines and what you need to look for when it comes to selecting a line just for ice fishing. Now, the date is December 11th, 2017. We have a bit of snow in Michigan. We have some lakes starting to freeze up in the Northland in Minnesota and upper Wisconsin and northern Michigan. And right now I'm looking out my apartment window and it looks like a snow globe outside. It looks very, very snowy. Old Man Winter is definitely on his way. Now, before I go any further, I need to make one thing clear. When it comes to ice fishing, compared to regular fishing, how you choose your line is nowhere near the same process of how you might choose your line when targeting fish through the ice. Let me drop some knowledge real quick for you and say this. When you're summertime fishing, you got to take a lot of things into consideration. The turbidity of the water, how much current's going to be there. Do you need to use a line that's highly abrasion resistant? Are you going to be fishing around logs? Are you going to be fishing in really, really thick weeds? Do you need a braid? Or are you going to be fishing in crystal clear conditions that might require a fluorocarbon and a finesse approach? But when it comes to ice fishing, you have an entirely new element that comes into play. You have the sheer cold that comes with winter. I know it's quite simple, but an ice fisherman that's new to the game will always be amazed at what the cold temperatures and cold weather can do to not only your line but your gear as well. When selecting a line for ice fishing, I recommend purchasing one that is designed for ice fishing because they are overall more conditioned to suit the weather even better. Now, I have a lot of different monofilaments that I really like to fish with. That's just a fact. But there are some of those monofilaments I would not ice fish with just because they don't handle the cold weather that well. They might not be as abrasion resistant when it comes to fishing around an ice hole. There's always an option, especially in fishing. This is probably what'll be the death of me. I'm always trying to look for what's the best ingredient to this fishing recipe. How can I get better at fishing? There's always something suited specifically for what you are doing. There are scientists out in the fishing industry that study fishing products and what can work better in any given situation. So, with that being said, I highly, highly recommend using a line that is designed for ice fishing. Now, if you know me, I'm a Berkley guy, but in this situation, I'm going to talk about a few other ice fishing lines that aren't Berkley. But let's start off with some of the easy ones that I've fished with. Or let me rephrase that. Let's start with what you ice fish for. Now, generally speaking, you fish for your larger predator fish, such as pike and walleye through the ice. Fish you can catch that are in season, and fish that you could eventually and potentially eat. A lot of folks eat northern pike, and a lot of the ice fishing walleye industry throughout the Midwest and northern region is tremendous. It's astronomically large. It's probably the most common species people fish for when it comes to ice fishing. It's probably close or second to panfish. But when you ice fish, more than likely you're either going to be targeting walleyes on a rod and reel, pike, whether on a reel or on a tip-up. Now, I'll talk about tip-up fishing in my next podcast segment. Or you're going to be targeting panfish because they are the most abundant and the most easiest to catch out of all other groups of fish. If you're new to ice fishing, I recommend just going out and seeing if you can catch yourself a nice little mess of bluegills, perch, or crappie. It'll keep you entertained. It'll teach you how to ice fish, and it'll pass the time a lot faster. I've sat on buckets before and hopped around from hole to hole and caught 2 walleyes over a course of 9 hours, and that was a long day, but the days go by really, really fast if you're out there and you're just catching, bluegills here and there, maybe a crappie every so often. Targeting panfish is a lot of fun. And when I do that, I've got myself a little not a medium light, a light powered ice fishing rod or an ultralight powered ice fishing rod. Something that'll give me a little bit of backbone to overpower the big fish, but definitely be sensitive enough to pick up on really, really subtle bites. Last year, I was with my good friend Andy Woodman on the north side of Lake St. Clair in a little town called Algonac. We were fishing the cuts in the early weeks of the year. There wasn't ice on the big lake, but the marinas had a couple of inches, and we were out there, and he was fishing with a light because his rod was a little bit stiffer than my ultralight, and he wasn't feeling the fish hit his presentation. He'd just pick up and feel weight on the end of it. That's because we were having these rock bass and crappie come through, and they weren't hitting our presentations and bait. They were just slurping them in. They weren't coming up and hitting it. They would just swim slowly up to it and slurp it in. He was using a cheaper monofilament, and I was using a smaller, highly sensitive monofilament that is designed for targeting panfish to the ice. Now, in specific, I was using the Berkley Trilene Cold Weather. The Cold Weather is blue, and the Trilene Micro Ice is clear. Both are incredibly small diameter. I fish with a 3-pound test for my perch, crappie, and my bluegills. They handle the cold weather very well. The elements doesn't get to them. The only benefit for me and why I choose to use the blue is that it's a little bit more visible in the snow. So when you're sitting on your bucket looking at your rod tip and you see your line going down into the hole, you can get a better picture of what your line is doing if you have a backdrop that makes your blue line appear to be a little bit more visible. With the micro ice, I love it, but it's just so impossible to see in midair because it's so thin. It's almost see-through. It's kind of got this gray hint to it, but I've caught a lot of fish with both the lines. It's actually what I use year-round when it comes to targeting panfish. I don't take the line off my ice fishing reels. I just put the reels on my panfish rods, and maybe once a year I'll replace it. I don't target panfish all too often like a lot of big time anglers do, but it's just something that I've personally done over the years, and it's worked for me. But that's aside the point. Get yourself a decent rod, but your line is very, very important when it comes to ice fishing. Monofilaments, a simple, I'd say you can go as big as a 6. I would not go bigger than a 6 for panfish. But if you just get a 4, that'll get the job done. I use a 3, I don't know, I guess I like to be different. The panfish can't see it. It's very thin. The Trilene, Micro Ice, and the Cold Weather handle very, very well. For panfish, if you just get a small monofilament, or heck, even an ice monofilament, like I said, because it handles the weather a little bit better, you'll be in good working order. Now, when it comes to targeting different species through the ice, such as walleye, and I live on the Great Lakes, every so often I'll see one of my friends going out and trying to target trout and steelhead through the ice. And that's not as common, but it's definitely doable. I know where some people do it, but pardon me there. But I've never had the opportunity to go out and try to hook a rainbow trout or steelhead or even coho salmon through the ice like some people have. But in those given situations, anglers that target larger predator fish use a fluorocarbon line for a couple of reasons. Fluorocarbon, as is highly abrasion resistant. Now, fluorocarbons labeled as ice fluorocarbons are even more abrasion resistant because they have a more apparent coating to the exterior of the line. So you could be jigging and catching fish, and your line could be rubbing the ice, the edge of your hole in the ice, and you don't have to worry about it as much. I'm not saying disregard it, but I'm saying, you can jig with confidence that your line is going to hold up to rubbing up against the side of your ice hole every so often. But fluorocarbon is very, very sensitive. The fish can't see it because water tends to be extremely clear in many bodies of water when it comes to ice fishing. Sometimes the absence of a line hanging off of a bait makes a difference when walleye or steelhead or even lake trout are coming in and really analyzing a bait that's in front of them. If they don't like one thing about it, they don't have to eat it, because in a lot of situations, bait is plentiful when ice fishing, especially in a lot of the channels that I fish, a lot of the different basins and bays that I've ice fished for panfish. There's bluegills everywhere. There's no reason they have to eat what you're putting down if they don't feel like it's a good investment. So, generally speaking, fluorocarbon, that's my main line and my leader for when I am fishing walleyes down to mid depth. If I'm fishing deeper or if I'm fishing lake trout through the ice, I'll use a braid. Now, this is where it gets a little dicey when it comes to selecting an ice fishing line. Braids absorb moisture, and that's why if you're just using a plain Jane spider wire or fireline braid out in wintry conditions, the moisture is going to freeze up your line a little bit. It's going to make it a lot more stiff. It'll still be pretty sensitive, and it's still not going to have any stretch value to it, but it is going to be frozen a little bit, and not a little bit, quite frankly, much harder to handle. Now, there are ice lines out there that are braids that have a wax coating to the exterior, sort of like how fluorocarbon has a heightened level of durability. Same thing goes with braid. But a lot of times, gentlemen who are fishing deep water with braid, jigging 80 to 100 foot of water with large spoons and large swimming jigs, they're fishing in shanties. And if you're in a shanty and it's above freezing temperature in there, your braid isn't going to freeze. That's plain and simple. Now, fish very, very, if you're fishing heavy stuff, or if you're fishing anything beyond, I'd say, the 30-foot mark, I'd recommend a braid, just so you can not only feel your strike due to the extreme level of sensitivity that braid has, but you can also set a home run of a hook set on a fish that comes through and might even barely decide to nip your bait, or you need to make a solid connection when a 20-pound lake trout inhales your jigging spoon. You got to be ready for anything when it comes to ice fishing. Plain and simple. Get yourself a product that will not only do you well, that'll also catch fish in the most effective way possible and withstand the elements. Now, there is the Suffix 832. I love Suffix line. They make an ice braid that works very, very well, and it's available in different colors. There's a yellow and white series by the name of Ghost. There is a blue braid. Oh, wow, that looks really, really nice. I'm Googling some of these right now. And, Suffix makes a good line. Seagar makes a nice ice fishing line. There's no wrong way to go as far as brands, in my opinion, but in my opinion, I'd say shell out the extra little bit of money for a quality ice fishing line, because when you take care of your stuff, it's going to take care of you. Plain and simple. Just go to your local Dick's Sporting Goods or your Dunham's or the Bass Pro Shop. Bass Pro Shop has a phenomenal selection of ice fishing gear. We got P-Line makes a fluorocarbon, Fluoro Ice. I've heard a lot about that. Berkley Fireline fused micro ice in the Crystal series, so that's got to be very smooth, very small diameter, but it's a very strong line, and the Crystal series is pretty much invisible underwater. But in my opinion, start with finding a small monofilament, and then when you want to venture out and really hone in on your ice fishing skills, get an ice fishing line, whether it be a small monofilament for catching your panfish, a moderate size fluorocarbon. I always use a size 8 fluorocarbon when I'm jigging walleyes, whether on Houghton Lake or Saginaw Bay. Sometimes those walleyes are very, very picky. And when I am fishing with braid, I haven't fished with braid all too much through the ice. I've used the Fireline Crystal, and I feel like I use a lot of Berkley products, but I have used Nano-Fill through the ice. That worked very, very well, but I was in a shanty when I was fishing with that, so I don't know how hard it could potentially freeze. Now, ice fishing, I love it. It's a great time. I really really enjoy ice fishing. You catch a lot of fish, but the difference between ice fishing is knowing how to ice fish, and I'll get into that subject later on. This is just me babbling into my recorder right now, just wanting to tell you a few things about ice fishing. Um, but what astonished me, I've been ice fishing for about 8 years now. It really caught me off guard when I found out how the weather had a tendency to hinder the performance of my line. I was young and I was kind of naive. I figured, hey, fishing line is fishing line. But the more I read about it, the more I came to realize, you know what, there might be a little bit more to this. Uh, because I've got my fishing line looks like a spring. I'm using cheap monofilament that came with a $15 ice fishing rod and reel combo. That's the difference. Take the time, do some research if you have to, or if you have any questions, feel free to holler at me. And check out some different ice fishing lines, whether it be Sufix, Vicious, I hear is a decent, affordable line. Trilene, P-Line. Northland makes a fishing line that's called Bionic, and they make an ice series called Bionic Ice, and it works very, very well from everything I've heard. I haven't checked it out myself. They don't sell a lot of Northland fishing line around where I live, but I should really give that a shot sooner or later. But when it comes to selecting an ice fishing line, that's all I have to say as far as a line recommendation. 4 and under for panfish, a 6 or an 8 for walleye, and then I'd say up to maybe a 14-pound braid if you're jigging large baits really deep, or targeting larger fish on the Great Lakes like a lake trout, like coho, salmon, or steelhead. I'd use a braid with a fluorocarbon leader, and I'd connect them with a ball bearing swivel snap. But I will discuss that a little bit more in detail in one of my future podcasts. Yeah, it's finals week right now for me in school, so I'm trying to get a whole bunch of things in order right now, and I get to go home in a couple of days, so I'll have 3 weeks off of school and work, and I'm going to do some ice fishing, but I'm not 100% sure where and when I'm going to go. With my college schedule, I'm lucky if I go out 3 or 4 times a year. Now, that's a lot less than how often I used to go out when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I'd go every day after school. I knew the lake really, really well that I live on. But now I go out there and I really appreciate it. And as always, I try to learn something every time I go out. That's what it's really about. When, when you go out there and learn something, you're becoming a better angler. You're going out there with a purpose to master the craft of fishing, if that's even possible. I've been debating that for years now, but hopefully I'll get to fish around the Saginaw Bay, my home lake, maybe even Houghton Lake if I'm lucky. My good friend Mark Martin, he has an ice fishing vacation school. If you are interested in something to be a part of this winter, you're either new to ice fishing or you've been ice fishing a few years and you want to learn from a few professionals and product development staff. I work a couple of the events as well. Check out his website at icefishingvacationschool.net. It's markmartin.net. And then once you get onto his website, you should be able to select a tab that says Ice Fishing Vacation School. Or you know what? Just Google Ice Fishing Vacation School, because it's quite a fun time. They can teach you a lot, but I seem to be rambling on and on. I just promised myself I'd talk about ice fishing line. I'm just getting into all different crazy sorts of things. But needless to say, I'm going to try to ice fish as much as I can. Get some content, maybe even a video or two for my YouTube channel. But as far as ice fishing goes, I'll hit it a few times this year and call it good. But if you have any questions, please let me know. You can contact me on Facebook, Twitter, or comment below. At Fishing with Dom. That's who I am. That's what I am. It's what I do. I'm Dom and I fish, and you can come fishing with me. But thank you for listening. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you very much. Remember, when you venture onto the water this winter, please be safe. I can't stress that enough. Be very, very, very safe, because when it comes to ice fishing, if you make it, could be quite bad. No. Thank you for listening, folks. Have a great day. Goodbye.